Guys, I give you my word of honor. You're not gonna get away with this discrimination.
In the heart of New York City, where skyscrapers pierce the sky and the crowd never ceases to flow, a person's life can often be overlooked unless something extraordinary stands out. Amelia Johnson, a poised and confident woman in her early 40s, found herself in the hustle of the city streets one ordinary afternoon. She had a plan that day, one that had taken weeks of consideration. She was on her way to surprise her husband Derek for their anniversary. As a successful lawyer with a notable reputation for championing equality, she walked through the polished glass doors of a Madison Avenue jewelry gallery, a place known for catering to the city's elite. Inside, the serene ambiance was a stark contrast to the chaos of the busy street. Amelia, an accomplished woman accustomed to moving through spaces like this, was at ease. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling that the store was a world apart from the one she knew. Her eyes caught a glimmer in one of the glass displays, a diamond pendant, its brilliance catching the light in a way that made her think of Derek's reaction when he would see it. As Amelia moved closer to admire the piece, a voice broke her reverie. "Can I help you with something?" Amelia looked up to see a store associate, a tall, blonde woman, standing with a forced smile. Despite her polite words, there was an unmistakable coldness. "Yes, I'd like to see that necklace, please," Amelia replied, pointing to the diamond pendant that had captured her attention. The associate hesitated, giving Amelia a suspicious once-over. Though subtle, it was clear. Amelia didn't quite fit into this world. After unlocking the case, the associate handed over the necklace, her smile stiff. As Amelia held it in her hands, she felt a subtle weight, the unmistakable feeling of judgment. "How much is this?" Amelia asked, trying to maintain her composure despite the unease creeping up inside her. The woman's lips tightened before she spoke again, her words laced with something she couldn't mask. "Are you sure you can afford this?" Amelia froze. She had heard words like this before, but hearing them again in such a direct, pointed manner stung more than ever. This wasn't just a comment, it was a challenge to her dignity. Keeping her voice steady, she replied, "Yes, I'm sure." But the woman's expression grew colder. Without a word, she reached out to reclaim the necklace. "It might be better if you returned it to the case," she said, raising her voice slightly, drawing the attention of the store's other customers. Amelia's face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment, but she said nothing. She placed the necklace back carefully, but it was too late. The store's security guard was already on his way toward them. "Is there a problem here?" the guard asked, his tone cold as he scanned both the associate and Amelia. "She was trying to steal that necklace," the woman said, her voice louder now. The accusation hit like a punch to the gut. Amelia stood frozen, unable to believe what she was hearing. "I wasn't—" She started to protest, but the guard cut her off. "Ma'am, I'll need you to come with me," he said, his voice firm. The weight of the moment crashed down on Amelia as she silently followed the guard, her heart heavy with humiliation. As she passed through the store, the stares of other customers followed her. Some whispered, some even pulled out their phones to record the scene. In the security office, Amelia was asked to sit down while the surveillance footage was reviewed. Her thoughts raced as she tried to process the turn. After what felt like an eternity, the guard returned, his expression softer. "We've reviewed the footage," he said, his voice apologetic. "You didn't do anything wrong. You're free to go." Amelia nodded, still shaken, and quietly left the office. Though she was exonerated, the emotional toll of the incident lingered. As she walked through the mall, she felt the weight of the situation settle in. This wasn't just about her. It was about the everyday racism that people like her faced, the quiet prejudices that had no place in a modern world. Amelia nodded. "They didn't even give me a chance to explain. It felt like they had already decided I was guilty." Derek's fists clenched. "This isn't over. We're going to make them pay for what they did to you." Amelia's heart swelled with gratitude. She knew Derek wasn't just talking about revenge. He was ready to use his power to make things right. Derek wasn't just her husband. He was the owner of the very mall where the incident took place. He wasn't about to let this slide. The next morning, Amelia and Derek set the wheels in motion. They weren't just going to let the incident fade into the background. Amelia knew this wasn't just about clearing her name, it was about something far larger. She felt the weight of the moment, the pressing need to make sure this didn't happen to anyone else. Derek was already mobilizing his resources. His position as the owner of the mall gave them leverage, but it was more than that. He had the power to bring about real change. Amelia had seen it in the quiet determination in his eyes. Amelia knew she needed help, and Marcus, the security guard who had cleared her name, was the first person she reached out to. After all, he had seen firsthand the impact of what had transpired. They met at a nearby cafe to discuss their next steps. Marcus's expression was apologetic, his remorse genuine. "I'm really sorry you had to go through that," he said as they sat down, his voice filled with regret. "I could tell something wasn't right from the start, but I had to follow the rule." "I understand," Amelia replied, her voice calm but firm. She had already forgiven him, but now they had work to do. "But we need to do more than clear my name. This isn't just about me. This happens every day to people like me." Marcus nodded, his agreement evident. "I've seen this kind of thing happen to other customers before. It's not right." They both knew what had to be done. They couldn't let this go without exposing the larger issue. They needed evidence, a lot of it. In the following weeks, Amelia and Marcus dug deeper, determined to uncover every detail. They combed through security footage, interviewed employees, and gathered testimonies from other customers who had faced the same kind of mistreatment. Each account added to the mountain of evidence, painting a clear picture of the store's It wasn't just the employees who were complicit. The store's management had allowed this behavior to continue unchecked for years. But as the investigation progressed, Amelia and Marcus uncovered something even more shocking. The store's manager, Claire Benson, had been in communication with Richard Evans, a businessman who had been trying to buy out Derek's mall for years. It all started to make sense now. What Amelia had thought was a personal attack, an isolated incident of prejudice, was part of a larger conspiracy. Richard Evans, it seemed, had been using the store's discriminatory practices to destabilize Derek's business and pressure him into selling. Amelia's stomach turned at the realization. She wasn't just dealing with racism. She was also in the midst of a larger corporate battle. But it didn't matter. She wasn't backing down. The store's actions had crossed a line, and she was going to make sure they were held accountable. Amelia and Marcus decided to confront the store's management. They weren't going to wait any longer. Armed with the evidence they had gathered, they walked into the jewelry store, ready to take action. Claire Benson, the store manager, was there, her expression as cold as ever. Amelia, Derek, and Marcus walked up to her, their resolve unshakable. "We know what you've been doing," Amelia said, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "We have evidence of your discriminatory." For a moment, Claire looked shaken, but she quickly regained her composure, her face hardening with defiance. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, crossing her arms in a defensive stance. Derek stepped forward, his presence commanding. "You've been caught," he said, his voice low and firm. "We have enough evidence to take this to court, and we will. Unless you want to lose everything, I suggest you cooperate." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of what was at stake. After a long, tense silence, Claire finally relented, her face paling as the realization sank in. "Fine," she said reluctantly, her voice tight. "What do you want?" "We want accountability," Amelia said, her voice unwavering. Claire hesitated for a moment, but then nodded, her expression still unreadable. "All right," she muttered, clearly defeated. The confrontation was over, but for Amelia and Derek, the battle was just beginning. They knew this wasn't just about one store, it was about changing the way people of color were treated in places of privilege and power. They weren't going to stop until real change was achieved. After their confrontation with Claire Benson, Amelia and Derek knew they couldn't stop there. The fight had just begun, and what they uncovered was more significant than they had initially realized. It was no longer just about the store, the manager, or the false accusations. It was about exposing an entire system of... The next few days were a whirlwind. Amelia and Derek made it their mission to push the story forward. Derek, with his wealth of resources and connections, reached out to key players who could help them hold the jewelry store accountable. But it was Amelia's legal expertise that was the backbone of their effort. She was determined to not only expose the store, but to make sure there was a seismic shift in how such practices were dealt with. They started planning their next steps with unwavering resolve. The media attention was already starting to build, and Amelia knew the public's support would be crucial in their fight. To build on that momentum, she contacted reporters and civil rights organizations, making sure the story didn't fade away. But despite their preparations, the real challenge came when they had to confront the store's corporate office. The stakes were high. It was no longer about one jewelry store. It was about the systemic racism that still lingered beneath the surface of so many institutions. Amelia knew this was bigger than any single battle, but she was determined to win. Meanwhile, Marcus continued to be a valuable ally. They enlisted his help to gather even more evidence. He had connections within the store, and over time, he managed to uncover hidden documents, financial records, and correspondence between Claire Benson and Richard Evans. It became clear that the store was part of a larger, coordinated effort to destabilize Derek's mall and force him into selling to Evans. The more they unearthed, the more it became apparent that this wasn't just a personal vendetta. It was a targeted attack on Derek's business, motivated by money and power. Amelia's frustration grew, but so did her resolve. This wasn't just about standing up for herself anymore. It was about standing up for all the people who had been hurt by the store's discriminatory practices. Finally, the day came when they felt ready to confront the store's management and bring everything to light. Derek, Amelia, and Marcus walked into the jewelry store once more, armed with their overwhelming evidence. This time, they were ready to take the fight to the top. When they entered, Claire Benson's expression was a mixture of guilt and defiance. She had no idea how much they knew or how much damage she had caused, but Amelia wasn't about to give her the chance. "We have everything," Amelia said, her voice firm and clear. "We have the evidence of your racist practices. We have the records of your dealings with Richard Evans. This stops now." For a moment, Claire hesitated. The guilt on her face was fleeting, quickly replaced by her usual air of superiority. "You don't know what you're talking about!" she snapped, folding her arms across her chest. Derek, ever calm and authoritative, took a step forward. "You've been caught, Claire. We have enough evidence to bring this to court, and we will, unless you want to lose everything." A tense silence hung in the air. Amelia and Derek stood unwavering, determined not to let this opportunity slip. Claire, clearly rattled, took a long breath before she relented. "We want accountability," Amelia replied, her voice unwavering. "You will publicly admit your wrongdoing. You will step down as manager, and you will ensure that your employees undergo anti-discrimination training immediately." Claire, pale and reluctant, nodded stiffly. "All right," she muttered, but her words lacked conviction. For Amelia, this moment felt like a victory, but she knew it wasn't enough. This was a small win in a much larger battle, but it was a step in the right direction. Derek's mind was already turning to the bigger picture. They had exposed one piece of the puzzle, but there was still so much more work to do. They knew that this wasn't just about one store, one manager, or one business. It was about transforming the way entire systems functioned. As they left the jewelry store, Amelia felt a strange combination of relief and urgency. She had taken a stand, and now there was no turning back. The next phase was going to require more than just exposure. It would require systemic change. But Amelia was ready. She had her husband by her side, and together they would continue pushing forward. The days following their confrontation were filled with media attention, public scrutiny, and growing pressure on the jewelry store's corporate office. Amelia knew that the path they had set out on was far from easy, yet despite the personal toll it had taken, she found herself more determined than ever. The victory wasn't just about what happened to her. It was about changing the system that allowed such discrimination to persist unchecked. Amelia and Derek's fight began to echo beyond the store's walls. Their story became a symbol of resilience against the quiet, everyday racism that so many people endured. The press conference they held was a defining moment. Amelia stood in front of cameras, her voice strong and unwavering, speaking not just for herself, but for all those who had suffered in silence for far too long. The media coverage spread quickly, and soon, people from across the country were rallying behind them. Their voices became part of a much larger conversation about racial injustice in the workplace and beyond. But even as the media buzzed, Amelia knew the fight wasn't over. The store had agreed to make changes, but it wasn't enough. The deep-seated prejudices they had uncovered needed to be addressed not just at this one store, but across the entire industry. The victory was sweet, but it left her feeling that there was still so much more to be done. Weeks passed, and the case continued to gain traction. It wasn't just about changing one store. It was about forcing an entire industry to rethink its practices. Amelia, Derek, and Marcus continued to gather evidence and push for reform, determined to make this a turning point. They were no longer just fighting for personal vindication. They were fighting for the future, for everyone who had been silenced or marginalized by the systems in place. Then, just when Amelia thought they might be gaining ground, something new came to light. Marcus had dug deeper into the store's history and discovered that they were far from the only victims of this kind of treatment. There had been other complaints, other customers who had been treated unfairly or accused of wrongdoing. It was clear now that the store's management had been covering up these incidents for years, silencing those who dared to speak out, paying off victims, and using intimidation to protect their interests. Amelia was shaken by this revelation, but it also ignited a fire within her. This wasn't just about the store anymore. It was about exposing the truth and holding those responsible accountable. She knew she couldn't let this moment pass. She reached out to the media once more, pushing for the truth to come to light. The floodgates began to open, and more victims came forward, each with their own story of discrimination and mistreatment. Together, their voices painted a damning picture of the store's toxic culture. The national attention grew stronger. The pressure on the jewelry store's corporate office intensified. Eventually, the company could no longer ignore the public outcry. They issued a formal apology, pledging to implement changes and overhaul their policies. Claire Benson, the store manager, was fired, and new measures were put in place to prevent similar incidents from happening in the future. It felt like a hard-won victory, but Amelia wasn't done yet. She knew this was only the first step in a much larger battle. Amelia and Derek's fight had resonated with people across the country, and they weren't. In the months that followed, Amelia worked tirelessly to bring her vision of a justice-driven organization to life. She gathered support from allies and activists who shared her mission. The Justice Collective, as she called it, became a beacon of hope for those who had been marginalized and oppressed. It wasn't just a law firm. It was a movement, a place where people could come together to demand justice, accountability, and a fair chance at dignity. Amelia's work was far from easy. The road ahead was filled with obstacles, setbacks, and moments of doubt, but she never stopped pushing. She knew the fight for justice was long, but it was a fight worth having, and with Derek's unwavering support, she knew they would continue to make a difference, one case at a time. In the end, Amelia's journey wasn't just about one store or one experience of prejudice. It was about her transformation from someone who had been wronged to someone who now had the power to change lives. Her victory wasn't just personal. It was a victory for anyone who had ever felt